I still remember the exact shade of gray the carpet was in that supply closet. It was that weird industrial color, somewhere between concrete and dust, with faint coffee stains that had been there since before I started working at the firm. I never thought I'd remember something so trivial, but when your entire world collapses in a space no bigger than a walk-in closet, you cling to the details. The way the fluorescent light hummed, the smell of old paper and toner, the way my wife's hand looked gripping the edge of a metal shelf, her knuckles white like she was holding on for dear life. But she wasn't holding on to me. She was holding on to him. We had been married for 8 years, together for 12. We met in college at a party in Boston, the kind of crowded apartment gathering where the beer was warm and the music was too loud to hear yourself think. She was wearing a red sweater, and she laughed at something I said that wasn't even that funny, but the way her eyes crinkled made me feel like I was the only person in the room. I proposed to her on a rooftop in Manhattan 2 years after we graduated, the skyline glittering behind us like we were in a movie. She cried. I cried. We were that couple, the one that made other people roll their eyes and secretly wish they had what we had. We bought a house in a suburb outside of Chicago, the kind with a front porch and a backyard that needed more work than we were willing to admit. We talked about kids, about growing old, about the kind of life we wanted to build together. She worked in marketing, creative and sharp, the kind of person who could sell ice to an Eskimo and make them feel grateful for it. I was in finance, more numbers than people, but I always felt like I was the lucky one because she balanced me out. She was the sun, and I was just some planet lucky enough to be in her orbit. That's how I saw it. That's how I saw her. And then she started working late. It wasn't sudden. It was the kind of gradual shift that you don't notice until you're already standing at the edge of something you can't come back from. At first, it was a few extra hours here and there, a project that needed her attention, a client that could only meet in the evenings. I believed it because it was the kind of gradual shift that you don't notice until you're already standing at the edge of something you can't come back from. At first, it was a few extra hours here and there, a project that needed her attention, a client that could only meet in the evenings. I believed it because why wouldn't I? She had always been ambitious, always driven. I admired that about her. I supported her. I made dinner, I walked the dog, I fell asleep on the couch waiting for her to come home. She always kissed me on the forehead when she got in, always said she was sorry, always promised it wouldn't be like this forever. His name was Derek. I knew him, not well, but enough to nod at him at the office holiday party, enough to shake his hand and make small talk about the Bears game. He was a consultant, brought in for some big project that had everyone in her department working overtime. He had that polished look that makes you slightly uncomfortable without knowing why, the kind of guy who probably used 2-in-1 shampoo and still managed to have perfect hair. He laughed too loud at jokes that weren't that funny, and he had a way of leaning into conversations that felt a little too familiar. I never liked him, but I never had a reason not to. That's the thing about trust. It doesn't sound an alarm. It just sits there, quiet and blind, until something shatters it. That night was supposed to be our anniversary. I had made reservations at a steakhouse downtown, the one with the dim lighting and the leather booths that she loved. I had bought her a necklace, nothing too flashy, but something I had saved for, a small gold chain with a pendant shaped like a crescent moon. She always said the moon reminded her of me, because I was steady and calm while she was all over the place. I got home early. I set the table. I lit candles because I remembered she liked that, even though I always thought it was a little extra. I waited, and then I got the text. Just a few words, short and clipped, saying she was so sorry but the project had hit a wall and she had to stay late. She'd make it up to me. We could do a rain check. I was angry. Not rage, not yet. Just that dull ache of disappointment that comes from feeling like you're second place to someone else's calendar. But I swallowed it, because that's what you do, right? You support your partner. You understand. You don't make it about you. So I put the steak in the fridge, blew out the candles, and poured myself a glass of whiskey. I sat on the couch and watched some game I didn't care about, waiting for her to walk through the door so I could act like it didn't bother me. That was my mistake. I waited too long. I waited until the feeling of missing her turned into something else, something more restless and gnawing. I don't know what made me drive to her office. Maybe it was the whiskey, maybe it was the loneliness, maybe it was just that little voice in the back of my head that had been whispering for weeks and I had been ignoring. It was nearly midnight when I pulled into the parking lot. The building was mostly dark, just a few lights on in the upper floors. Her floor. I sat in the car for a minute, the engine ticking as it cooled, watching the window like I could will her to appear. I thought about leaving. I thought about calling her and just hearing her voice, even if it was distracted. But I didn't. I got out and I walked inside. The lobby was empty. The security guard barely looked up from his phone as I swiped my pass. I took the elevator up, the stupid muzak playing something soft and forgettable. The doors opened and the hallway was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy and unnatural. I could see her office door at the end, the light on, but she wasn't there. I called her name, soft at first, then louder. Nothing. That's when I heard it, a muffled laugh. Not hers. A man's voice, low and teasing. It came from somewhere to the right, past the break room, near the supply closet that was supposed to be locked after hours. I don't remember walking toward the sound. My feet just moved, like they knew something my brain wasn't ready to accept. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light cutting through the darkness of the hallway. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, loud and frantic. I could feel my palms sweating. I pushed the door open, just enough to see, just enough to confirm what every instinct in my body had been screaming at me for months. And there she was, my wife, the woman I had built my entire life around, the woman who had promised to love me through sickness and health, richer or poorer, till death did us part. She was pressed against a shelf, her blouse unbuttoned, his hands on her hips. Derek. His back was to me, but I could see the way his shoulders moved, the way his head tilted down to kiss her neck. And she wasn't pushing him away. She wasn't saying no. Her hands were in his hair and her eyes were closed, and she was smiling like she hadn't smiled at me in months. I stood there for what felt like an eternity. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by the back of his stupid, expensive blazer and throw him through the drywall. I wanted to ask her why, to demand an explanation, to make her feel a fraction of the pain that was splitting my chest in two. But I didn't. I just stood there, frozen, watching my marriage dissolve in the fluorescent glow of a supply closet. And when she finally opened her eyes and saw me, the look on her face wasn't surprise. It wasn't horror. It was almost relief, like she had been waiting for me to find out so she could stop pretending. She didn't say my name. She just stared, her lips parted, her hands still tangled in his hair. He turned around, slow and arrogant, and when he saw me, he didn't even flinch. He just gave me that same smile he gave everyone, the one that made you feel like you were a joke he was in on. The world went silent. The hum of the fluorescent light disappeared. The smell of toner vanished. All I could see was her hand slipping away from him. All I could feel was the floor falling out from under me. I turned around and walked away. I didn't run. I walked back down the hallway, past her empty office, past the break room, past the elevator. I took the stairs. He just gave me that same smile he gave everyone, the one that made you feel like you were a joke he was in on. The world went silent. The hum of the fluorescent light disappeared. The smell of toner vanished. All I could see was her hand slipping away from him. All I could feel was the floor falling out from under me. I turned around and walked away. I didn't run. I walked back down the hallway, past her empty office, past the break room, past the elevator. I took the stairs, all 14 flights. My legs were moving, but I couldn't feel them. My chest was tight, my throat was burning, and I kept seeing her face over and over again, that look of relief that told me she had already checked out of our marriage a long time ago. I sat in my car for almost an hour, staring at the dashboard like it had answers. The keys were in my hand, but I couldn't make myself start the engine. I thought about all the late nights, all the excuses, all the times I let it slide because I trusted her. I thought about the necklace in the glove box, the one she was never going to wear because she was too busy wearing someone else's hands. I felt stupid. I felt angry. I felt broken in a way I didn't know was possible. She called me 3 times that night. I let it ring. She texted, just a few words, saying we needed to talk. And I knew she was right. We did need to talk. But not because she wanted to explain. Not because she wanted to fix anything. We needed to talk because I needed her to know what she had done. I needed her to see me, really see me, in a way she hadn't in years. I needed her to understand that the life we had built together wasn't just a foundation she could walk away from without everything crumbling. I finally started the car and drove home. The streets were empty. The house is dark. The world asleep, while mine was ending. I walked into our house, the one we had painted together, the one with the porch swing I had built for her, the one that smelled like her vanilla candles and our dog and us. And it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a museum of everything I was about to lose. I sat on the edge of our bed, the sheets still made from that morning, and I waited. Not for her, for myself. To feel something other than this hollow coldness that had taken over my entire body. The front door opened at 2 a.m. I heard her footsteps, slow and hesitant, pausing in the hallway like she was trying to decide what to say. She opened the bedroom door and I saw her standing there, still wearing the blouse from the closet, the one with the button she hadn't bothered to fix all the way. Her hair was messy, her makeup smudged, and for a second, just a second, I hoped she would look at me with regret. But she didn't. She looked at me like I was the one who had done something wrong. Like I was the one who had invaded her privacy. Like I was the problem. She opened her mouth to speak and I held up my hand. I didn't want to hear her voice. Not yet. Not when I could still feel the ghost of her smile aimed at someone else. She stood in the doorway, frozen, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her blouse, that same nervous habit she had since college. I used to think it was endearing. Now it just looked like guilt wearing a costume. She said my name, soft and shaky, like she was testing whether I would still respond to it. I didn't. I just stared at the wall behind her, at the wedding photo hanging in the hallway, the one where we were both so young and so sure of ourselves. The glass caught the dim light from the bathroom and reflected her silhouette, and I realized she was blocking it. She was literally standing between me and the memory of who we used to be. She took a step into the room and I flinched. I didn't mean to, but my body reacted before my brain could stop it. She stopped walking and her face crumpled, that look she gave me when she wanted me to feel sorry for her. It worked for years. It worked every time she forgot to pick up milk, every time she snapped at me after a bad day, every time she chose her career over date night. But it didn't work now. She stopped walking and her face crumpled, that look she gave me when she wanted me to feel sorry for her. It worked for years. It worked every time she forgot to pick up milk, every time she snapped at me after a bad day, every time she chose her career over date night. But it didn't work now. Now all I could see was the way her hand had been tangled in Derek's hair, the way her wedding ring caught the fluorescent light while she let him kiss her neck. I felt something twist in my stomach, something dark and cold that I didn't recognize. It was rage, but not the hot, explosive kind. It was the kind that settles into your bones and makes you patient. It made me want to watch her squirm. She started talking. Words spilled out of her like a dam had broken, and I let them wash over me without catching a single one. Something about stress, something about feeling unseen, something about how she didn't mean for it to go that far. I heard my own voice cut through her rambling, flat and unfamiliar. I asked her how long. She hesitated, and that hesitation was louder than any confession. I asked her again, slower this time, and she looked at the floor like the carpet might swallow her whole. She said a few months. I felt my jaw tighten so hard my teeth ached. A few months. 12 anniversaries came and went. 3 birthdays, 2 holidays, countless nights where I fell asleep alone and convinced myself it was fine because she was building a future for us. The future I was building was a lie. I asked her if she loved him. She cried harder, and that was all the answer I needed. She didn't say no, she said she didn't know, and that was worse. It meant she had thought about it. It meant she had weighed us on a scale and found me wanting. I stood up from the bed and she stepped back, her hands raised like I was going to hit her. That stung more than anything. After 12 years, she thought I was capable of that. I walked past her into the living room and grabbed my keys. She followed me, still talking, still trying to explain herself in a way that would make this okay. She said she had been unhappy for a while. She said she felt like we were roommates, not lovers. She said I was always working, always distracted, always too tired to notice her. She blamed me, and part of me knew she wasn't entirely wrong. But I had been tired because I was working to afford the house she wanted. I had been distracted. She followed me, still talking, still trying to explain herself in a way that would make this okay. She said she had been unhappy for a while. She said she felt like we were roommates, not lovers. She said I was always working, always distracted, always too tired to notice her. She blamed me, and part of me knew she wasn't entirely wrong. But I had been tired because I was working to afford the house she wanted. I had been distracted because I was planning a trip to Italy for our 10-year anniversary. I had been distant because I thought we were secure enough to not need constant reassurance. I made mistakes, but I never made the choice to betray her. I never let someone else touch me in the places that were hers. I never made her feel like she wasn't enough. I said all of that to her, my voice cracking at the edges, and I watched her face shift from guilt to defense. She told me I was twisting things. She told me I was making it about myself. She told me I never listened to her, and she was right about that, because right then all I could hear was the sound of my own heart breaking into pieces that would never fit back together. I left the house and drove to a diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that never closes because it has no reason to. I sat in a booth with chipped red vinyl and ordered coffee I didn't drink. The waitress looked at me like she had seen 1,000 men like me, hollow-eyed and clinging to the last shreds of their dignity. I didn't call anyone. I didn't text my brother. I didn't message my best friend. I just sat there, watching the steam rise from my mug, replaying every moment of the last few months through a new lens. Every time she came home late. Every time she was guarded with her phone. Every time she flinched when I touched her. It was all there, all the signs, and I had ignored them because believing the lie was easier than facing the truth. I thought about the early days. The way she used to look at me like I was the answer to every question she never knew she had. The way she held my hand in the car, her thumb tracing circles on my palm. The way she whispered my name in her sleep, like it was a prayer. I don't know when that stopped. I don't know if it was gradual or sudden, if there was a specific moment where she looked at me and saw someone else. Maybe it was the first time Derek made her laugh. Maybe it was the first time he touched her shoulder in a meeting. Maybe it was the first night she stayed late and didn't feel bad about it. I'll never know, because she'll never tell me the full truth. She'll give me just enough to make herself feel better, and I'll spend the rest of my life filling in the blanks with the worst possible scenarios. I stayed at the diner until sunrise, watching the sky turn from black to gray to pale blue. The world kept moving. Cars drove by, a delivery truck honked, birds started singing like nothing had changed. Everything looked the same, but I felt like I was walking through a stranger's life. I went back to the house and she was still awake, sitting on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She had been crying, her eyes red and swollen, her hair a tangled mess. For a second, just a second, I felt sorry for her. She looked small and scared and lost, the same girl I fell in love with in that Boston apartment. But then I remembered that she chose this. She had 100 chances to stop, 1,000 moments to tell me the truth, and she chose silence. She chose him. She asked me to sit down. She asked me to talk. She asked me to give her a chance to explain. And I did, because I wasn't ready to let go yet. I sat across from her and I listened while she told me the story she wanted me to believe. It started with stress, with pressure, with me being unavailable. It started with Derek being a friend, a mentor, someone who understood her work in a way I never could. It started with a drink after a late meeting, then another, then a kiss that she said caught her off guard. She said it was a mistake. She said she regretted it. She said she loved me and she wanted to fix it. But even as she said the words, her eyes flickered to the side, and I knew she was editing. She was giving me the version of events that made her look like a victim of circumstance, not an active participant in her own betrayal. I asked her if she would have told me if I hadn't walked in. She didn't answer. She looked down at her hands, and I watched her wedding ring catch the light, and I knew. She would have let it go on. She would have let it become something bigger, something that forced her hand, something that made her the wronged party instead of the wrongdoer. I told her I needed time. I told her I needed space. She begged me not to leave, said we could work through this, said she would do anything to earn back my trust. But I didn't trust a word she said. How could I? She had been lying to me every day for months. She had looked me in the eyes and told me she loved me while she was still tasting him on her lips. The foundation of our marriage wasn't just cracked, it was dust. I packed a bag. I didn't take much, just some clothes and my laptop and a framed photo of us from our honeymoon. I left the necklace on the kitchen counter, still in its box, the one I had bought for our anniversary. I didn't want it anymore. It wasn't hers to wear. I walked out the front door, and I didn't look back. Not because I was strong, but because if I looked back, I would have crumbled. I drove to my brother's house, an hour away, and I called him before I pulled into the driveway. He answered on the second ring, groggy and annoyed, but when he heard my voice, he went quiet. I told him what I saw. He told me to come over. He didn't say I told you so, even though he had always thought I married above my station, even though he had never fully trusted her. He just said come over, and I did. His wife made me coffee, and his kids stayed in their rooms, and we sat in his garage like a couple of teenagers, my brother and me, passing a bottle of cheap whiskey between us. He didn't push. He just let me talk, let me spill everything out, let me rage and cry and laugh at the absurdity of it all. He told me about his divorce, the one I had barely paid attention to because I was too busy being happy. He told me about the nights he spent on his friend's couch, the feeling of watching his life implode while the rest of the world stayed normal. He told me it gets better, but he said it without any optimism, like he was just stating a fact he had to believe to keep going. I didn't believe him. I couldn't imagine a version of my life where this didn't hurt. I stayed at his house for 3 days. I didn't answer her calls. I didn't read her texts. I knew if I heard her voice, I would fall back into the pattern, the comfort of the familiar, the cowardice of staying. She sent me a message on the second night, a long one that I read, even though I told myself I wouldn't. She said she had ended things with Derek. She said she told her boss she needed a break. She said she was willing to go to counseling, to do the work, to rebuild what we had. She said she missed me. And I believed that part. I believed she missed me. But missing someone and loving someone are two different things, and she had confused them for a long time. On the 4th day, I went back. Not to stay, not to forgive, but to get my things. I had decided I needed to be alone, to figure out who I was without her, to untangle my identity from the one we had built together. She was waiting for me, dressed in one of my old sweatshirts, like she was trying to remind me of a time when we were inseparable. I told her I was leaving. I told her I needed to think. She cried, and I let her, but I didn't hold her. I didn't wipe her tears. I didn't tell her it would be okay. Because it wasn't okay. It might never be okay. And I was tired of pretending that love was enough to fix something she had broken so thoroughly. I walked through our house one last time, touching the walls, the furniture, the curtains she picked out. Every room had a memory, and every memory felt like a lie. I thought about all the future plans we had made, the children we had named, the vacations we had mapped out. All of it was gone. Not because of me, but because of choices she made when I wasn't looking. I didn't say goodbye when I left. I just walked out the door, got in my car, and drove to a furnished apartment I had found through a friend. It was small and impersonal, with beige walls and cheap furniture, but it was mine. It was the first time in 12 years I had a space that didn't have her fingerprints all over it. And for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. The first week in that apartment was a blur of takeout containers and sleepless nights. I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, counting the water stains like they were stars, and I'd replay the supply closet scene on a loop in my head. Every detail was burned into my memory. The angle of his shoulders, the curve of her back, the way she didn't push him away when I walked in. I tried to hate her. I tried to feel nothing, but the anger would fade into this aching hollow that made me miss her even more, and I hated myself for that. I would pick up my phone to call her, my thumb hovering over her name, and then I'd see the photo on my lock screen, The one of us at a baseball game, smiling and carefree, and I tossed the phone across the room like it was on fire. I was a mess. I knew I was a mess, but I didn't know how to stop being one. My brother called me every day, checking in, making sure I had eaten, offering to come over and sit with me in silence if that's what I needed. His wife sent over meals, casseroles and lasagnas, wrapped in foil, with little sticky notes that said things like, "You're stronger than you think," and "This too shall pass." I appreciated it, but I couldn't bring myself to eat most of it. I lost weight. My clothes hung loose, my face looked gaunt in the mirror, and I started wearing hats to hide the fact that I hadn't shaved in days. I looked like a man who had given up, and in a way I had. I had given up on the future I had planned, on the person I thought I was, on the marriage I thought was unbreakable. But somewhere around day 10, something shifted. I was sitting on the floor of my empty living room, surrounded by boxes I hadn't bothered to unpack, and I realized I couldn't keep living in the past. I couldn't keep reenacting that moment in the supply closet like it was the only scene in my life. I had to find a way forward, even if I didn't know where that path led. I started unpacking. I put my clothes in the closet, my books on the shelves, my laptop on the small desk by the window. I bought a plant from the grocery store, some kind of fern that was supposed to be easy to care for, and I named it after my brother because he was the only one who seemed to have his life together. It was a stupid little thing, but it made the apartment feel less like a cage. I went back to work. I had taken 2 weeks off, using up all my vacation time and then some, and my boss was understanding, but I could tell he was running out of patience. I threw myself into spreadsheets and meetings, let myself get lost in numbers and projections, anything to stop my mind from wandering back to her. It worked for a few hours at a time. I'd get into a rhythm, my fingers flying across the keyboard, my brain focused on quarterly reports and profit margins, and I'd almost forget that my entire personal life had imploded. And then someone would mention her, not by name, but by association. A client we both knew, a project she had worked on, a restaurant we used to go to, and I'd be right back in that parking lot, right back in that hallway, right back in that closet. I started going to therapy. It was my brother's idea, and I resisted at first because I thought it was admitting defeat. But sitting in that sterile office with a woman named Dr. Patterson who wore cardigans and asked me how I felt, I realized it was the opposite. It was me taking control of something I had lost. She didn't judge me. She didn't tell me to leave or stay. She just let me talk, let me unpack all the tangled emotions I had been carrying, and she helped me see that what I was feeling was normal. The anger, the sadness, the confusion, the guilt. She told me that betrayal wasn't just a wound, it was an amputation. I had lost a part of myself, and it was okay to grieve that loss. It was okay. A client we both knew, a project she had worked on, a restaurant we used to go to, and I'd be right back in that parking lot, right back in that hallway, right back in that closet. I started going to therapy. It was my brother's idea, and I resisted at first because I thought it was admitting defeat. But sitting in that sterile office with a woman named Dr. Patterson who wore cardigans and asked me how I felt, I realized it was the opposite. It was me taking control of something I had lost. She didn't judge me. She didn't tell me to leave or stay. She just let me talk, let me unpack all the tangled emotions I had been carrying, and she helped me see that what I was feeling was normal. The anger, the sadness, the confusion, the guilt. She told me that betrayal wasn't just a wound, it was an amputation. I had lost a part of myself, and it was okay to grieve that loss. It was okay to not know who I was without her. I started going to the gym, not because I wanted to get in shape, but because I needed somewhere to put all the energy that was eating me alive. I'd run on the treadmill until my lungs burned, lift weights until my arms shook, and when I was done, I'd sit in the steam room and let the heat dissolve whatever was left. It was the only time I felt numb in a good way. The physical exhaustion drowned out the mental noise, and for a few precious hours, I was just a body, not a man with a broken heart. I started sleeping again. Not great, not through the night, but enough to function, and the fog in my head started to clear, just a little. She kept reaching out. Texts, emails, voicemails that I listened to and then deleted. She told me she was going to counseling, that she was reading books about infidelity, that she was doing the work to understand why she had strayed. She told me she missed me, that she thought about me every day, that she still loved me and believed we could find our way back to each other. Part of me wanted to believe her. The part that still remembered our wedding day, the way she looked in her dress, the way she promised to love me forever. But the other part, the part that had seen her with Derek, the part that had heard her say she didn't know if she loved him, that part was louder. It told me that words were cheap, that she had said a lot of things she didn't mean, that trust, once broken, was almost impossible to rebuild. I started dating. Not seriously, not emotionally, just going through the motions of putting myself out there. My brother set me up with a friend of his wife, a woman named Rachel who worked in graphic design, and had a laugh that filled a room. We went for coffee, and I spent the whole time comparing her to my wife. She was blonde, my wife was brunette. She was quiet, my wife was loud. She ordered tea, my wife always ordered a double espresso. I was a terrible date, distracted and distant, and she called me out on it halfway through. She said I wasn't over my ex, and I didn't deny it. She said I was wasting her time, and she was right. I apologized and paid the bill and walked her to her car. I never called her again. I had a few more dates after that, all with the same result. I would sit across from some woman who was probably wonderful, and all I could see was the ghost of my marriage. I would ask about their jobs, their families, their hobbies, and I would nod along while my mind drifted back to the house in the suburbs, the porch swing, the bedroom we had painted together. I was still living in the past, and I knew it, but I didn't know how to stop. Dr. Patterson told me that healing wasn't linear, that I would have good days and bad days, and that I had to be patient with myself. But I was tired of being patient. I was tired of feeling stuck. One night, about 3 months after I moved out, I saw her. It was stupid, a coincidence, the kind of thing that happens in movies but you never think will happen to you. I was at a grocery store, picking up a few things for dinner, and I turned down the cereal aisle, and there she was. She had her cart half full, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing a sweater I had bought her for Christmas 2 years ago. She looked tired. She looked thinner, like she was having just as much trouble eating as I was. And when she saw me, her face went through a whole series of emotions: shock, hope, fear, sadness. She said my name like it was a prayer, and I felt my resolve crumble. We talked in the parking lot for an hour, leaning against her car while the sun set behind us. She told me about her life, about the counseling she was doing, about the way she had cut off all contact with Derek. She said she had made the biggest mistake of her life, and she would spend the rest of it trying to make up for it if I gave her the chance. She said she understood if I couldn't, but she had to try. And I could see it in her eyes, that same desperation I had felt the night I found her, the desperate need to hold on to something that was slipping away. I told her I wasn't ready. I told her I needed more time. She nodded, and she didn't argue, and she got in her car and drove away. I stood in that parking lot for a long time, the grocery bags heavy in my hands, watching her taillights disappear. And I realized something. I wasn't as angry as I used to be. The rage had cooled into something else, something more complicated. I still loved her. I probably always would, but I wasn't sure I could ever trust her again. And without trust, what was the point? Dr. Patterson said that some relationships survive infidelity, but they require a radical honesty that most people aren't capable of. I didn't know if we had that in us. I didn't know if I had that in me. I went back to my apartment and I cooked dinner, for the first time in weeks. Nothing fancy, just pasta and sauce, but it tasted like victory. I sat on my small couch, the fern on the windowsill, the city lights flickering through the blinds, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not happiness, not closure, just a quiet acceptance that I was going to be okay. No matter what happened with her, no matter what the future held, I was going to survive this, and that was enough for now. 6 months. I sat on my small couch, the fern on the windowsill, the city lights flickering through the blinds, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not happiness, not closure, just a quiet acceptance that I was going to be okay. No matter what happened with her, no matter what the future held, I was going to survive this, and that was enough for now. 6 months. That's how long it took for me to stop flinching every time my phone buzzed. 6 months of early mornings at the gym, Late nights at the office and weekends spent alone in that beige-walled apartment with only the fern and my thoughts. I had settled into a routine that felt less like survival and more like existing, which I suppose was an improvement. I wasn't crying in the shower anymore. I wasn't replaying the supply closet scene on a loop every time I closed my eyes. The wound had scabbed over, not healed, but at least it wasn't bleeding all over everything I touched. I had even started to enjoy small things again, like the way the morning light hit the kitchen counter, or the taste of good coffee from the shop around the corner, or the feeling of a clean shirt fresh out of the dryer. It was progress, slow and fragile, but it was there. And then she called. Not a text, not a voicemail, an actual call. I was at my desk, knee-deep in a quarterly report, and her name flashed on my screen like a ghost I thought I had laid to rest. I stared at it for so long the call went to voicemail. Then she called again, and again. I answered on the fourth ring, my voice flat and cautious, and she started talking before I could say hello. She had been in an accident, a minor one, she said, a fender bender on the expressway. No one was hurt, but she was shaken up and she didn't know who else to call. I heard the tremor in her voice, the kind of genuine fear you can't fake, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not love, not forgiveness, just the remains of a habit I hadn't fully broken. I told her I would be there. The drive to the hospital felt surreal. I passed the exit for our old neighborhood, the one with the porch swing and the backyard that needed work, and I didn't even slow down. I was a different person now, or at least I was trying to be. I pulled into the emergency room parking lot and found her sitting on a bench near the entrance, a small bandage on her forehead, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. She looked small and fragile in a way I hadn't seen since college, and for a moment I forgot all the reasons I had left. I just saw her, my wife, scared and alone, and I sat down next to her without thinking. She thanked me for coming, her voice barely above a whisper. She said she didn't have anyone else, which I knew wasn't true. She had friends, she had family, but she had chosen me, and that meant something, even if I didn't want it to. We sat in silence for a long time, watching the ambulances come and go, the chaos of the emergency room swirling around us. She reached for my hand, and I let her take it. Her fingers were cold, her grip hesitant, and I felt the familiar ache of missing her wash over me. I told myself it was just the moment, just the shock of the accident, just the ghost of who we used to be. But I knew I was lying to myself. We went for a walk after she was discharged. There was a park across the street, a small one with a pond and a bench and a path that wound through some trees. It was autumn now, the leaves turning gold and red, the air crisp and clean. She asked me how I was doing, and I told her the truth, that I was getting by, that I was learning to be alone, that it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. She nodded, and I could see the sadness in her eyes, the regret she carried like a weight she couldn't put down. She told me about her counseling, about the breakthroughs and the setbacks, about the way she had started to understand why she had done what she did. She said she had been running from something inside herself, something she didn't know how to face, and she had used Derek as a distraction. I listened without interrupting, something I hadn't been able to do before. I had been so consumed by my own pain that I never stopped to consider hers. Not that it excused anything, not that it made it right, but I started to see her as a whole person again, flawed and broken, and desperately trying to piece herself back together. She wasn't the villain I had made her out to be. She was just someone who had made a terrible choice, someone who was living with the consequences, someone who was trying to be better. And I realized, sitting on that bench by the pond, that I had been carrying so much anger it had become a part of me. I didn't know who I was without it. We started meeting for coffee, just coffee, nothing more. At first it was awkward, stilted conversations about the weather and her work and my apartment. But slowly, over weeks, the walls started to come down. We talked about our childhoods, our dreams, our fears. We talked about the things we had never told each other, the secrets we had kept, the resentments that had festered beneath the surface of our marriage. She admitted she had felt invisible for years, that my focus on work and my inability to connect emotionally had made her feel like she was slowly disappearing. And I admitted that I had been afraid, terrified actually, of losing her. So I had retreated into the safety of my own head, convinced that if I didn't engage, I couldn't be hurt. It was ironic, really. The very thing I had been avoiding had happened anyway. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments where the anger would flare up and I would storm out of the coffee shop, leaving her sitting alone with her latte. There were nights where I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life by even talking to her. My brother warned me, said I was setting myself up for heartbreak, said she would never change. Dr. Patterson said that reconciliation was possible, but it required both of us to be completely honest and completely committed. She said it was the hardest work a couple could do, harder than starting over with someone new. And I knew she was right. But I couldn't let go. I couldn't walk away from the woman I had loved for over a decade without knowing, without giving it one last chance. So I made a decision. I invited her to my apartment. Not for anything romantic, just to see if we could exist in the same space without the weight of our history crushing us. She came over on a Saturday afternoon, bringing a bottle of wine and a nervous smile. I had cleaned the place top to bottom, moved the fern to the kitchen, put fresh sheets on the bed, even though I had no intention of taking her there. It was like a first date, but with all the baggage of a failed marriage. We sat on my couch and talked for hours, laughing at old memories, crying over the ones that hurt. And at the end of the night, when she stood up to leave, I did something I hadn't done in almost a year. I kissed her. It wasn't passionate, it wasn't desperate, it was soft and tentative, like we were both testing the water. She pulled away first, her eyes searching mine, asking a question she didn't have the courage to voice. I told her I needed time. I told her I wasn't ready to say I forgave her, because I wasn't sure I ever would. But I was ready to try. I was ready to see if we could build something new from the ruins of what we had lost. She cried, and for the first time, I held her. Not because I felt obligated, not because I was trying to fix her, but because I wanted to. Because despite everything, she was still the person I chose. And maybe that meant something. The months that followed were the most difficult of my life. We started seeing a marriage counselor together, a man named Dr. Chen, who had a calming voice and a way of asking questions that cut straight to the heart of things. We dug into the wreckage of our relationship, uncovering old wounds and buried resentments. I learned that I had been emotionally absent for years, that I had taken her for granted, that I had stopped seeing her as a person and started seeing her as a fixture in my life. She learned that she had been looking for validation in all the wrong places, that she had confused excitement with love, that she had been so afraid of losing herself in our marriage that she had lost herself in someone else. It was brutal and honest and raw, and there were moments where I wanted to walk out and never look back. But I didn't. We didn't. We kept showing up, week after week, peeling back the layers of our dysfunction. We talked about Derek, and I forced myself to listen while she explained how it started, how it escalated, how it ended. It was painful, excruciating, to hear her describe the details of her betrayal. But I needed to know. I needed to understand. And she gave me that. All of it, without flinching. She apologized, not just for the affair, but for the years of silence, the years of pretending, the years of letting me believe we were okay when we weren't. And I apologized for my own failures, for the distance, for the neglect, for the way I had made her feel invisible. We didn't move back in together. We took it slow, seeing each other a few times a week, going on dates like we were just starting out. I started sleeping better. The nightmares faded. The anger, which had been my constant companion, began to loosen its grip. I started to see a future again, not the one I had planned, but a new one, uncertain and messy and full of possibility. I didn't know if we would make it. I didn't know if the trust could ever be fully restored, but I knew I wanted to try. For the first time in a long time, I wanted to hope. And then, on a cold December night, she told me she was pregnant. She was sitting on my couch, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, and she said the words so quietly I almost didn't hear them. I felt the world tilt, my heart racing, a million thoughts crashing through my head. It wasn't Derek's. She had been with me for months now, and the timing lined up perfectly. It was mine, our child, a life we had created together, not out of betrayal, but out of the fragile new thing we were trying to build. I looked at her, at the fear and hope in her eyes, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. I knelt in front of her, and I held her, and I promised that I would be there, that I would be the father our child deserved, that I would do everything in my power to make this work. It wasn't a guarantee. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was just a promise. And for now, that was enough.